Why do British people look down on Americans? I'll say that I've definitely heard, some like negative sentiments towards Americans before. I wouldn't say it's common. You definitely don't hear it every day, but I've definitely heard it. Why? Why is that? Like, is it because America's the younger country, but it's doing so well, like financially and everything else? Or are there other reasons behind it? I don't know. 3, 2, 1.
How do you feel the British perceive Americans?
I feel like there's quite a lot of, I hate to say it, but mockery involved.
I think a lot of people think Americans are extreme.
Do you think that the British think that they're better than Americans?
I think some do, yeah.
There's a lot to make fun of, I think.
Sure.
We're also fantastic at queuing as well. That's another great thing about us.
Rubbing me the wrong way because they're too extra. It doesn't seem like it's genuine.
Today, I'm in London to get to the bottom of a very important question. For as long as I can remember, I have had the sense that the British look down on Americans. This is a generalization, and therefore doesn't apply to everyone, but it's a strong enough trend that I felt I needed to investigate this further. Here's a quote from Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, that perfectly captures the feeling that I have about this. With some, the anti-American sentiment ran very hot. I was reminded of my childhood, when people warned me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too rich, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest.
I think the optimism in America definitely clashes sometimes with the British, like, stiff upper lip, the sort of reserved nature of most British people. I think that American can-do attitude kind of like, just kind of butts heads a little bit.
I'm very curious what people are going to have to say about this. I have a feeling I'm onto something, okay? So, having said that, let's start talking to some people. Excuse me, shooting a video for YouTube. Could I ask you guys a question? It'll be really brief. You hate it? Okay, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Not that easy today, huh?
No, it's not. I was wondering if I could just get a moment.
I've got too much time.
We're off to a very slow start. That's okay. Let's just change up this.
To be fair, the weather does look horrible. Like, it looks like it's just about to rain. People are trying to get that last bit of sunshine.
Because I'm feeling like there's enough projections in that 100-meter radius.
I always feel really terrible that everyone's first attitude is, oh, you're from America, are you? Oh, okay. Which is always you always feel a bit bad about that, because I'm not entirely sure why we still do that, but,
How do you feel perceived as Americans by the British here in London?
A big, stupid, bellowing oaf. Yeah, genuinely. I always feel like I have to apologize for being American. It's like, I know my accent's the worst thing you'll hear today, but can I just...
It's not.
Order a coffee?
My experience, I feel like, has been a little bit different. I think that might be somewhat informed by the fact that I'm a student here.
Okay.
At first, there was a bit of a learning curve. Like, when I would speak loudly on the tube, I would kind of get looks, and people would tell me, like, you're being American. Like, can you maybe not?
There's definitely sort of a sense that there is a lot of difficult things going on in America, and that America potentially could be quite a difficult place to live, especially if you're of colour or from the Middle East.
Yeah, I do think the media does a really bad job of, portraying America abroad sometimes. Like, I think the media as a whole, it's bad news all the time. Bad. Like, the bad stuff that's happening in America, America's done this today, it's done that today. Whereas it doesn't talk about the good at all. Like, you never hear, like, that's why I've stopped watching the news, to be honest with you. It's just constantly negative, isn't it?
I have to admit, the inspiration to make this video came when I moved to Europe. As I've explored in previous videos on this channel, many Europeans have mixed to negative views of Americans as dumb and uncultured. But to my surprise, the same goes for the British. I've come to realize that the only people that see the British as intelligent and sophisticated are the Americans. Many Europeans, like the Portuguese or the Spanish, see a very different reality.
Isn't that ironic? Literally, in Spain, because English people flood there every summer, they live there now, a lot of Brits, and they just go there and they very loudly drink and have a good time. The Spanish look down on British people. It's like a cycle.
The British that go off on holiday to get extremely drunk and break things. The British that are isolationist with Brexit. The British that don't learn foreign languages, that stick to their native tongue. Wait a second, I thought to myself. That's what Americans do. Other people do this as well.
How dare they copy us?
I kid, of course. Still, it does feel like the Brits act like the Americans of Europe, but I am certain that is not something that they'd like to hear said about them. I mean, no offense, I am American after all. Does that not prove my point though? No one wants to stoop to the level of Americans. I felt I had to get my answers directly from the source. My perception is that the UK is 1 foot in Europe, 1 foot like in the Americas. It feels like it should be in the middle of the Atlantic. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a pretty conclusive idea. But yeah, I think that's definitely true because a lot of people wouldn't even class England as being in Europe. You know?
Yeah, that's true because it's not connected to Europe, you know, in terms of the land. It's like a separate island.
Even in England, when you talk about going to Europe, no one ever thinks you mean Doncaster. They always think you mean Germany. You do get some perception that everyone's some sort of like a Valley girl accent or something like that, and I think that annoys people quite a lot. But then again, it's the same way that English people are often perceived as all sort of being from London. The American dream, making yourself better and being seen to be self-improving, and it's a lot about earning money and being the best you can and going to the gym and all these kind of things.
Do you think that's, are you saying it's positive or negative?
I think it's a positive thing for Americans, but I think the way it's perceived is often everyone goes, oh, get out of my face, you know, because they probably, no one likes to.
There's definitely some resentment there because all of the things he just described about, you know, making more money, getting in shape and stuff, the majority of people would want that, like Brits included. Like everybody wants to make more money. Everybody wants to look better. So I don't know why the Brits see it as a negative. Why do we see that as a negative? Like, or is it fake? I don't know.
Enjoy someone else's success, at least in England anyway. I think in America it's probably very different. Oh great, you got a promotion. Fucking bastards, you know.
The identity of being American is like such a thing.
Right.
That I don't think other places have that as much.
I don't think people are necessarily dumb, and I don't think it's a question of being dumb. I think it's just that there's this idea of like, yeah, being the best. To think that like people in America, depending on where you're born, you can have access to care or not, it's frightening. And I don't know how you can speak about being the best when you can't even make sure that everybody's like taken care of. Are you treating everyone the same way in America? No, not everyone is treated the same way, just like not everyone is treated the same way in Europe.
Having been to America a lot, they often ask, obviously as a joke, but just like, do you know the royal family or anything like that?
So do you feel that generally, this big generalization, there's mockery towards the Americans and Americans towards the British is more like cute. We think you're cute.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
How do you feel about Americans thinking you're cute?
Well, it can be taken as a compliment, obviously, but if they think that we're, like, as a country, not really a force to be reckoned with, then just because we do all these, like, things that date back to long before the US was established, it's not really relevant that they can mock us for that.
Is it condescending?
Maybe there's an element of, you know, England used to have control over America. America fought back and won its independence, and since then has just, like, soared upwards. Obviously, there's, you know, you can argue that America isn't in the best place right now, but it's still the biggest superpower in the world. And it's kind of left England behind in a way. And maybe there's a bit of resentment from that angle, maybe.
Would you say?
A little bit.
Or ignorant?
More ignorant. It doesn't like hurt me. You know?
How do you feel Americans perceive the British, first of all?
They kind of look down on us.
You feel that?
I feel like Americans think like they're on the top of everything, and there's always competition between the two.
So do you feel like the British have a chip on their shoulder a little bit because of that?
Yeah, a lot.
What do you think the British are better at than Americans?
Yeah, polite, really.
More polite?
Yeah, more talkative, more helpful.
More helpful, the British are more helpful.
More talkative. I suppose with British people, if you can get us talking, like once you get past that initial awkward phase, man, like especially in a pub, like if there's if there's alcohol involved, yeah, we'll talk your ear off. But I think, you know, in the street or in Walmart or a store, you won't, like I've seen videos of Americans just have random conversations, which do happen sometimes in England, but I think those random sober conversations happen more in America.
Yeah, than Americans. But Americans are nice, they're funny, got good music.
Got good music, okay. Yeah. Well, the British have good music too, man.
Americans are taking over the music scene.
But I mean, come on, there's a lot of great British music. So here's the thing that I think is going on here. We are not the same, the Brits and the Americans, but we sure have a lot of similarities. Compare us to the Japanese, or to Native Americans, or to Ethiopians, and the differences between Americans and the British seems relatively small. We're like blood siblings in the village that is the globe. So here's what all of this started to make me think of. There's a concept in psychoanalysis, I'm going to read you the definition, but it's called the narcissism of small differences. This comes from Freud. The narcissism of small differences is the idea that the more a relationship or community shares commonalities, the more likely the people in it are to engage in interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences perceived in each other.
That's a great quote. Like, no matter how similar you are with someone else, you're always going to find something to like separate you. And then you're going to start getting at each other because of those little few differences.
We see this all over the world, between the Argentinians and the Chileans, for example, between the French and the Belgians. And indeed, I think this is what is happening between the Brits and the Americans. But at the end of the day, I feel like we make the little things that make us different much bigger than they really are.
The way that we speak and the words that we use.
Yeah.
And again, we were talking about this, weren't we?
Yeah.
Man, human beings, we're so tribal, aren't we? Like, like, why are we so sort of like, you know, like we have to like group ourselves and...
About
We've been talking
words.
about things like autumn versus fall. And it's like that's often something that people like bring up. And for some, well, it's because it's a simpler word. And it's like, fall, American.
You guys don't say
classic.
fall?
No, we don't say fall. We
Oh,
say
interesting.
autumn.
Okay.
So this is autumn. Not fall.
But you can say autumn as well. All right, before we go any further, I want to quickly thank the sponsor of this video, BetterHelp. Having said all of that, thank you, BetterHelp, for supporting my work. And now, let's dive back in. Personally, when I come to the UK, I have the impression that I've come halfway across the Atlantic. I'm not just off the coast of continental Europe. And by that I mean, culturally, it feels so much more similar to the life that I had in the US. The convenience of life, the speed, the capitalism, the language.
Everyone speaks English. Everyone's like got the same sort of core values. I'm not necessarily a big Christian person at all, but we all come from this like Christian-based countries. America and Australia are English. There's some things that happen in history, but at the end of the day, we're kind of all the same group of people in that regard.
Culturally influenced.
Culturally influenced by the same group. So I personally don't see many differences at all.
I mean, I've got wonderful American friends who I adore. So that question...
I think if push came to shove, England would always have America's back, for sure. Like, no matter what. I think all of this stuff, it's like your siblings, you know? Like, I always bicker with my sisters and my brother. Always. But, like, would I do anything for them? Absolutely. I think it's that same relationship, that same dynamic.
For me, it's a difficult one because I think they're great, they're fantastic. Yeah. I think the differences in the way our language is, in the way we use different words, that's where there's a difference.
So pretty minor.
Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes some of the British media or the portion of the British population that looks down on Americans, is it a way to deflect some of the issues that exist here? Could that be said of all societies?
Yeah, you can say that of all societies, but you can also say that about the media. They're always distracting, aren't they, from topics, whatever it is.
America's seen as very alpha male. If you think about it in terms of masculine and feminine, there's an alpha maleness to Americans. And maybe it's just the way they speak, the accent, but you don't really have that sense of Britain. I think there's a stereotype of the repressed male, that soft-spoken.
Considering we're like right on the edge of Europe, we have more in common with America in many ways than we do with the rest of Europe, which in theory is where we should be more aligned. And I think there's sort of something that can feel sort of slightly odd about that, you know, like with the whole Brexit thing, breaking away more from where we're most closely connected to.
Like Brexit, I'm sorry, like it was the dumbest thing that we did. It was such a bad thing. We're financially weaker. We have way less influence on the world stage. You know, our biggest trading partner was the EU. You know, we've imposed all these tariffs on ourselves. It's just the dumbest. It was such a bad decision. It was such a bad decision. I really hope that someday soon we can reconcile that and get back into the EU, because it's just so obvious at this point that we are financially weaker, like as a country.
And sort of being in a situation where, you know, we're going to end up with chlorinated chicken instead.
There's this tendency to think of Americans as just, you know, they're simplistic, really.
Are you, like, annoyed by the Americans here?
Sometimes.
I wouldn't say
Depends how they are.
Now, the interesting thing is...
She doesn't hold her back at all. She's just like, she doesn't care.
I love to drag the US through the mud and criticize it for all the things that I think it deserves criticism for. But the second the Brits start criticizing me or the US, you have nothing to say. Kind of like, I can criticize where I grew up, but you aren't allowed to. And the British, in my opinion, are doing their version of the same thing, criticizing themselves to no end, but no one wants an outside opinion. Maybe we all do this. I think we all do this. It's like pointing at someone else's flooding house when your own house is on fire.
So I lived in America for 6 years. I lived in California, Alabama, and Oklahoma for 3 years. Everyone hears my accent, and it's like, oh, where in America are you from? I'm like, bro, I'm actually from Australia, but then they give me their little opinions on American stuff. So I've actually had to play defense a couple times since I've been out here.
Are you serious?
I'm so serious. Because they talk about guns or they talk about this, but they don't have like a very good understanding, not just English people, this is people around the world, even in Australia, of the history of America and why those things became what they were.
Yes, and I think a lot of the British people that have like negative sentiment towards America haven't even been there, probably. Like this, it goes back to the media thing. Like all they know about America is what they've seen on television, the news, or what their friend has told them. Like they haven't been there. Like, you know, I'm lucky enough to have been to America a few times now, and mostly like overwhelmingly positive experiences on my behalf. Like I'm trying to think of a negative experience I had with anybody in America, and I can't think of one. Like, obviously I've not spent a huge amount of time in America, but yeah, not one bad experience.
People trying to, you know, throw rocks and then hide their hands.
Yeah.
They don't want the blame to be on them, so it's easy to put it on the big superpower that is on everyone's TV.
My perception is I don't consider Americans necessarily lesser in terms of like lifestyle, culture per se. I just think it's a bit more apparent than it is in the UK, but the UK is just as problematic.
There's always sort of a sense in the past that like America was sort of, you know, 2 decades ahead of what was happening in this country. There is a sense that we're getting closer in a time frame.
I would say younger generations tend to be a bit more, and the only word I can think of it is shameful of the heritage. I think it's a lot of things from like colonialization and things like that. There tends to be a lot more shame around it.
We're a small island, right? So we've got a small island mentality, but because we've got a small island mentality, we've got to overcome it by kind of that impression that we're the best. And I think that's changing.
Definitely it's changing. I think younger people are embracing more of an American mindset in terms of, you know, trying to aspire, like, at least from what I've seen, like that American dream, trying to, you know, make it in life, trying to improve your circumstances. I'm seeing more and more of it. Maybe it's because of the social media. Maybe it's because younger people are seeing Americans and their way of life and stuff, and they want that. They want that for themselves.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a total reflection of society now, but I think historically it has been, of course. Let's flip the question. How are Americans perceiving the British?
My answer to that is there is a power dynamic going on, and for better or for worse, the US is much more of a world superpower right now. So I don't think that the US feels threatened necessarily, like competitive with Great Britain. Because of that, I think there's kind of like they're cute, you know what I mean? Like they're Harry Potter and James Bond and sophisticated and, you know.
Use words like autumn.
Exactly. But I also think that there's also a major degree of ignorance. Like the US is so self-involved. We're not even paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the world. So there's not even enough to form an opinion, you know? Now, this video was definitely supposed to be in good fun. I harbor no ill will towards the British. I find our rivalries as human beings across cultures, across nations, to be comical and interesting. It's like an insight into human psychology. And despite all of the, you know, criticizing going on here, I'd like to end on a positive note. I'd like to express my appreciation for a few things that I think the British do better than Americans. Your healthcare system, for one. Also, the Premier League. They say football was invented.
My man, I think he's an Arsenal supporter. Come on, you Gunners.
In England, and if that is true, as someone with Argentinian background, I can only thank you. I also have to thank you for your incredible music. What a contribution to our collective heritage. It is a foreign idea to me to have a royal family, but I respect the commitment to tradition.
But I did move here the week that the Queen died.
The royal family, they're kind of falling out of favour, I'd say. Like, I think, yeah, I don't know how much longer they have, to be honest with you, because I think, you know, knowing how much money they get paid, I know that people say that they're a tourist attraction, but I need to see some data on that. Like, how many people fly to the UK specifically to go and look at Buckingham Palace? I'm not sure. But yeah, like, I don't know how much longer they have, to be honest with you.
So it was really interesting to see. I think my first impression of like the British as a public was that of like mourning for their queen, you know, the 14-hour-long line to go see her lying in state. So I think it was a little bit of a shock. This might sound silly, but how procedural the British can be. I noticed that tends to be, like, every British person I've met tends to be very procedural, as opposed to Americans, I think, are a little bit more
spontaneous,
like, dare I say, free-spirited or individualistic. So, I mean, I think that's not to say that one is better than the other.
And as a final note, we are obviously
great
all individuals, and so stereotypes never fully work. Still, I find it's so fascinating to explore the stereotypes and cliches that we have for one another. Not always, but often there is some sort of basis of truth there, or else they wouldn't spread and persist as they do. Anyway, having said all of that, I hope you enjoyed this video.
Great video. A lot of food for thought. A lot of food for thought. I do think it's kind of like one of the consequences of being super successful. Like, you're always going to have haters. Like, it's sad. Like, there's just something about humans that whenever another person is doing really, really well, like, usually there's a tiny bit of well, sometimes it's not tiny, sometimes it's pretty big, of like jealousy, envy. And I think some of that comes into play. Like, if America was the size of, let's take some random country, let's say Spain. So let's say America was Spain and they had the same behaviors, the same attitudes, but it was the size of Spain. Would the resentment, would the jealousy, all of that stuff be as strong? I don't think it would be. I just think it's because America, you know, dominates the world in so many areas that, you know, there's going to be haters. Like, but I think if push comes to shove, like, you know, obviously we would have your back, like, no matter what. I mean, that's obvious. NATO, like, there's, you know, the US and the UK were like that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.